Well, I want to welcome you to our program today. Our special guest today is the Reverend Sharon Kelly. She right now is serving as the pastor of Grace Lutheran Church in Darlington, Wisconsin. And so, Pastor Sharon, I just want to thank you so much for being on our program today.
Thank you, Pastor Jeff.
And she is a very intelligent lady, a very gifted lady. Pastor, she has had a lot of education and a lot of experiences. And so today, most specifically though, we're going to be talking about vocation, especially as it has been for African American women during the 20th century. And so that whole topic of vocation is really an important one. And I think like in the church, and we think about, well, pastors have a vocation in the church, but it's not just limited to pastors, is it?
Exactly. And that had been the historical inheritance from the Middle Ages, that the church-related people really had the vocation. The priests, the monks, the nuns, the probably even the desert mothers and fathers had the real vocation. But with the Reformation, which is coming up for us Lutherans on October the 27th, in an effort to reform, to say to the church, how about thinking about things this way rather than that way? How about doing things this way rather than that way? You know, Martin Luther referred to all the baptized as having a vocation, that this time on this set is a vocation to communicate to our neighbors, whether they are baptized or unbaptized, Christians, Muslim, Jewish people, Baha'i, that all of us are invited to consider that we have a vocation. And there's a religious discourse that's from the Western, or religious conversation, I should say, that's from the Western Christian perspective about vocation. But in North America, there's this popular discussion about vocation. You know, what are you going to do with who you believe yourself to be? So that's kind of a really sort of condensed way of saying it. What are you going to do with who you believe yourself to be? And so the first way we think about that is how we're going to enter the marketplace. What are we going to do to prepare ourselves to compete for employment? And so that's one way to consider your vocation. When you retire, you know, what are you going to consider your vocation? Could you consider your hobbies, your avocation, something you might want to do to continue to earn income, or just share in the public space, in the outside of your private space, in the public world. So there's lots of interesting books which I wish I could bring, none of which I've contributed to. I'm trying to just contribute an article about this discussion about vocation. And what prompted me in looking at this is thinking about the work history of older or mature African American women who I interviewed during the mid-20th century, who worked during the mid-20th century, many of whom are now deceased, but they really helped me discover what to think about vocation, which always has a history, but it doesn't always have the history of lots of different people. I mean, in many parts of the two-thirds world, vocation might be considered more moral. What does it mean to be a good person? Not just what you're going to do to earn money, but what does it mean to be a good person? So it's about being who you are and doing, even if it's unpaid. And even our institutions in our society have a vocation. How are they going to be in the world? What are they going to do? Like, you know, the Connect program as a part of this network.
Yeah, so vocation is not just simply putting in 8 hours and then getting your paycheck, but seeing it as being a lot more than that, to see, you know, how you conduct yourself, to what you're doing, how you serve,
Yes.
others in the community,
Right.
in society.
Right.
And so that's kind of what I'm hearing you say is
Exactly,
that as you
exactly.
go about your work, to understand that as Christians we are called
Yes.
into those vocations to bring glory to God and to serve Him
Right.
in what we're doing.
Right. But we have the secular conversation that says, yes, it can be your 8 hours that hopefully you're doing joyfully and with some sense of accomplishment and desire, because part of that work is to help make a healthy environment for everyone by your being present in it in those 8 hours, whether it's on an assembly line or whether you are showing up here, you know, filming and doing the paperwork to make it happen for the Connect program. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
You know, I talk to so many people where, you know, some people they say, I just really don't like going to work. And it's not because they don't like their work.
Right.
It's just that some of the people that they work with are so difficult to
Yes,
work with. And so I think
yes.
if we all play our part to say, okay, we are in this together.
Yes.
We are working and we have these goals and these products or whatever that we're trying to produce.
Exactly.
But that we also are here understanding that we are here to be, in a sense, ministers to each other.
Exactly,
You know, to be helping
right.
and supporting
Each
other
other, yes.
in those ways.
Oh,
I think it's so
yes.
very important. But when we think about vocation, yeah, you know, the two of us, we've been called to be pastors in our
Right.
Lord's church.
Right.
But not everybody's called to be a pastor, obviously.
No,
You know,
no.
that there's
And you want to
lots-
find that out before you take on the position. Yes.
But when you look at all of the different tasks that need to be done in the church or
Sure.
out in society,
Right.
the workplace, you know,
Yes.
so I think of like young people, but I also think about people who are middle-aged, who are thinking about a
Right.
career change, wondering,
Exactly.
you know, maybe God is calling me to do something else today. You know, are there certain things, you know, as far as trying to figure out what is my Christian calling?
Sure. Sure.
What is that vocation?
Right.
Would you have some suggestions as far as things that we do to discern that?
Oh, that's an excellent question, Jeff. And one of the things you have to consider, first of all, is how to be brave.
How to be brave. Okay.
How to be brave, because it's not going to be without risk. It doesn't mean you should. I went to India a long time ago for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America to witness the first Indian woman to be ordained. I've wanted to be a global missionary. I don't think it's going to happen. Because I needed to be close to my parents when my siblings, when my father was ailing, and then subsequently died. So it doesn't mean we all should run away from where we're planted, but it might mean what risk can you consider that you could live with the consequences? So that's one of the things you might have to think about. You know, can I live with the consequences of this risk I may take? So a lot of people think going to work 8 hours isn't without risk. How can that be? I mean, you might have to drive to get there. You might have to be dependent on others to get there, like a public transportation or a coach system that you pay into. So it's not going to be without risk. So what are the consequences that you should kind of write down to see that you can live with?
Okay.
Yeah, that's one thing to consider. Another thing to consider is the preparation you might need, because that's not going to be without risk either. Should
sure.
you go back to school? You know, can you afford the debt in going back to school? What if I pursued a doctoral degree at the University of Minnesota and they closed my program? I had no idea that was going to happen.
You mean that you were studying in a program and all of a sudden somewhere along the line they just said, well, we're not doing this anymore?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, and I
That's
had to
tough.
finish it or forget about it. So that's what you have to do. What kind of preparation will you need? What will it contribute to your family? Of course, in our capitalistic society, the outcome of our work, our time and our energy, our labor, should be compensation. So can you live on less compensation? Or are you willing to live with the risk, the trade-offs for more compensation? Because more compensation may mean a little less sleep at night if there's more demands placed on your time.
Well, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so those are some of the things that we look at when we are trying to discern a calling, a vocation, would be the risks and
Right.
and what you have to do to prepare yourself to do, like education and
Right,
various
right.
things
Yes.
and then also the time element. How much are you
Right.
willing to invest in yourself? Then?
Exactly,
As far as are you willing,
exactly.
some people can work all around the clock.
Right,
But is it
exactly.
really worth it?
Right, and some people really need, I don't want to necessarily say more time off, but they're willing to trade with colleagues. I only want to work 30 hours a week. And that's going to be consequences to that.
Yeah.
Especially from the marketplace perspective of, the size of your retirement, how much money you immediately have to spend, the kind of things you're going to want to do with your time off. If you're somebody who wants to read more books and rent movies from the library, then you probably don't have a lot of high expensive interests. Well, if you want to travel globally, well, you're going to have to figure out, how can I do that in such a way, especially if I don't want to take a high demand employment position or create for myself a high demand employment position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a lot of times the higher you go up the ladder as far as rank, the more stress and demands and the toll that takes on your person.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and possibly your family.
Yeah. So I find this very interesting when you mention about African American women
Yes,
during the
yes.
middle 20th century.
Yes.
And, I think about that time in our nation's history, and some of the,
Oh, it's Jim Crow. I mean,
all those kinds of things, the tensions that were going on.
Chronic
and
tensions.
how tough it must have been
Right,
for them.
right, yes,
So
yes.
why don't you just share a little bit about
Oh,
this? You said you interviewed a lot of some of these
Yeah,
gals.
right. I interviewed a number of these women who are much more mature, and it was just a gift to hear them. It was just, I'm so grateful for that, and there's nothing I can do to repay them for what they were willing to share with me. And you need to know some did not want to share with me.
Okay.
Because it was just so painful. Because one of the dimensions that we're looking at as our society is what we call the intersection, so what they refer to as intersectionality. We're looking at class, we're looking at race, and we're looking at gender, and how they intersected in the lives of these mature African American women as a force and as a daily issue. Because as a force, there's nothing you can do to control it. But as a daily issue, you have to figure out ways they had to confront what they were doing. So one older African American woman said to me, I'd rather, if I'm going to work with my hands, I'd rather have a pencil in them, meaning that white employers couldn't just think every time they saw her that she was going to carry a mop and a bucket for them. Or a needle and a thread, even though they may be important things to do from the perspective of vocation, because we need places clean and we need clothes repaired, but that shouldn't be assigned to them because of their gender, their race, and what they perceived about them as their class. So one of the assumptions about vocation, and it is an assumption, is that we get to choose what we do. And not everyone has that inheritance. And so when you didn't get to choose what you do and you had to confront and fight for doing what you believed you should be doing, then how did you do that? And some of the ways that I discovered in my conversation with them, and this is just really shortening it, one of the things that they did was they networked with kin and community. They just kept always talking about with each other, family and friends, and even people whom they didn't know well. How did you get the work you're doing? You know, how did you become one of the first black women on the floor at Honeywell in the Twin Cities, for example? You know, so they networked with kin and community. They broke through. They thought about opportunities that they heard about, or maybe somebody had just sort of mentioned something and they realized they could act on it. You know, a breakthrough isn't what you think of when you think about television, where, you know, someone goes, I got my big break. You know, breakthroughs are often really tiny steps you take towards meeting your goal or desire. So we broke through, we networked with kin and community. Once again, they had to be brave. We were the ones. They were often the first and only African American women in their workplaces.
So they're really pioneers when you think about it.
Oh, that's an excellent word, Jeff.
Pioneers. But, well, meaning that
that's an excellent word.
It's tough for a pioneer because you are basically blazing a trail.
Yes, yes. And I want to think about that word, even though it's loaded in the upper Midwest with kind of the European stampede of you know, homesteaders to Native Americans, and I surely don't want to make any implications by that. But yes, sometimes in certain situations, you come with all the resources that brought you there, that supported you getting there, but you still may be the only one because that employer hasn't worked hard enough to bring other people who look like you with you. Yeah, so yeah, they had to help bring those other people. And that wasn't their vocation. Their vocation, they thought, was getting that employment position.
Sure.
But they also had to, as an employee, talk about other African American women they know, or other women of color they may know, who would like to be there too. So that they had to take on that task.
Yeah, so they were really, like you say, wanting a position, but they are really representing a whole group of people.
Yes, yes, and sometimes they were badly treated for representing a whole group of people.
Sure, like you say, the risk.
Yes. Yes, yes.
And what they had to go through, it had to have been terrible in many ways.
Yes, in some ways, yes. And then, and yet they had to figure out if they could live with that compromise of being racially insulted in that workplace, or insulted because of their gender or their class, those intersections, and still needing to go back because it was a position they wanted with the compensation they needed and the accomplishments they achieved. Yeah. It's always complex. And we just think certain people didn't face that complexity. And what I learned from interviewing these mature African American women, they were facing that complexity just like everybody else, but from the position of those intersections of race, gender, and class. But we all should be facing complexity at work.
Yeah, well, they really seem like they had to have been, people of, you mentioned, like, courage.
Yes.
Is that the word that you're brave?
Both.
Being brave, courageous, persistent.
Yes,
and
that's
also
an excellent
willing to
word.
take that risk.
Yes.
Because you look at, really, that was kind of the beginning of, what has, of so much. But I would think even today, though, there still has to be so much work. And I would hope that it's not just the African American people who are working on this, but as the church and everybody, that we are all here as to work for the liberation. Jesus is in the work of liberating people. And so however people are being discriminated or oppressed, that we all need to be part of this effort if we're going to be on God's team, so to speak.
Yes. Wow, Pastor, you just preached it. That was really good. I didn't even think of the word liberation, but that's an excellent word. Their presence, though it was very, probably very fearing for many of their white colleagues, and yet, paradoxically, it was liberating. Because it needed to happen a long time ago, and yet it was. You're right, and that's part of what we may not think we need to do in our workplaces, or we think only certain people should do it. The pastor, the civil rights worker, the
Right.
the
professionals.
The professionals, but the Black Lives Matter kids taught us, yes, this is what we're going to do, even if you might not like the way we're doing it.
Yeah.
We're going to remind you that we're free, that we're free. And I think you're exactly right. How can we understand that, yes, our work is, especially when we agree to do a paid task, there are expectations, there are constrictions on our time. We can't just do it when we want it to do it. We got to do it when our employer needs us to do it, because we are solving a problem for them, whatever that problem may mean. But we may still be needing to use our workplaces as places of fighting for liberation for others that we may not have expected that we needed to do as a part of our vocation.
And however we see that, whether it's helping somebody from a different race than ourselves to say that, hey, no, this person needs to be treated equally. But then I also hear, stuff like, well, how some people get bullied in the workplace. That is not just that person who's being bullied's problem. That everybody has to surround and to say, hey, we're not going to tolerate this in our workplace.
Exactly. Yes, that is taking on your vocation of being a liberator. You're exactly right. Yeah. Oh yeah. That is happening all too often. I mean, one of the things I know that Minnesota had to do, and it might be in Wisconsin as well, where people had to be brought to the legislature to make sure your time isn't being stolen. That you're being fully compensated for your time. You think that with the history of unions in this country, that conversation is over. Yeah. And it's still happening, that people are experiencing time theft in their workplaces.
Isn't that something?
It is, yeah. Oh yeah. And
amazing.
But the global dimensions of seeing your vocation as a liberator, to borrow your word. I love that word. What we think about, not just what we are expected to do and have to do at work, and the compensation we receive, but our vocation as consumers. How do we spend that we've earned, that helps liberate people in other places in the world? So that's significant too, and we don't often want to think about that because it is kind of hard.
Yeah.
A lot of what we're talking about is kind of hard because it gets back to your saying, how to be courageous, how to be brave, how to can I live with the consequences of the risk that I'm taking? Because to talk about it from a Christian perspective, the baptized are scattered. They're in the for-profit business world, they're in the not-for-profit world, and they're in the government sector, that's based on taxes. So they're scattered in all these sectors, and in any one of them, people can be bullied and still be discriminated against because of ableism and skin color and gender and sexual orientation.
Yeah, so now when you think about these women and what they have done, I just use the word pioneer as
and trailblazing. I love those words.
Trailblazing, they're very courageous.
Yeah.
But obviously they have helped at least broaden the path a little bit.
Right.
Or to help and open up more doors, which I know there's a lot of work that still has to be done in this area.
Right.
So we appreciate and we can be thankful for their accomplishments and things like that. Yes. But we see that this is an ongoing task.
Yes, exactly. The vocation isn't a destination.
Yeah,
it's not. It's a journey.
A journey.
It's a journey, and how you see yourself on that journey and how you live out on that journey. One of the things I'm kind of personally frustrated about with myself is my journey of not getting my ideas in print that I'm discussing with you, because often I hear particularly younger black women in these multi-international firms, talking about things that these older black women have already talked about. And
Oh,
I
yeah.
think, wow, if I could get what I believe completed to meet the expectations of a journal, that could help them. You know, because what I'm often trying to say, even by being here, is that there's a history and a philosophies, histories and philosophies of vocation, and we all need to know about them from everybody's perspective.
Yeah, if we just learn from our history,
Yes.
then we don't have to continue to repeat it.
Yes,
We
yes,
don't have to
exactly.
continue to reinvent the wheel all the time.
All the time, exactly. Yeah.
So you're working on a journal.
Working on
or-
an article
or
for a
an
journal,
article,
yeah.
And so that a lot of that encapsulates a
Yes.
lot of what you've been talking about here
Right,
in
right.
vocation.
Yeah, I'm going to steal some of your ideas, Jeff.
Well, no, I've been just getting what you've been sharing with me.
I know, but
Bold and courageous, and I think resolved and brave.
Yes,
Yeah.
but I like how you reframe some things. I mean, you know, we always got to think about context because they may sound different in different places, but I like what you said too, especially liberation. Yeah, it's great.
Well, God is a God of liberty. You know,
Yes.
He used Moses to liberate
Yes.
God's people from out
Yeah,
of Egypt,
right.
and Jesus Christ is arisen, so He's liberating all of us, so
Right,
that we,
exactly.
can see that we are neither Jew nor Greek, or
Right.
slave or free, or
Yes,
male or female,
female, yes.
He goes right down the list that we all are on the same plane now.
Yes.
Because that's what Christ does. Is that
Exactly,
He is
exactly.
we live for Him, and He's our common denominator.
Right.
Yeah, but anyway, that's
sure,
very
sure.
good. The emphasis of vocation and
Yes.
how our vocations, certainly do
A sense of vocation.
a
Yes.
sense of vocation.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
what an impact that has on ourselves and the world around us.
Exactly,
and the people
exactly.
and the influences that we have and how God works through us.
Right.
Yeah, well,
Wow,
today
thank
we're so
you.
blessed to have
Yes.
Reverend Sharon Kelly with us. And we just want to thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
Wow,
you are a
thank
very
you.
special person and just very insightful. And
Thank
God
so
bless
much.
you and
You
continue
and
your
yours.
good work. Yeah.
Thank you. Amen.
And I want to thank all of you for joining us this day as well.
Thank you.